Okay, everyone, if you head back to your seats, we're going to get started with the afternoon. Just a reminder that the refreshments are going away until our break at 2:45, so if you want coffee or tea, scoot up there now, please.
I think you just turned Gary off, didn't you?
All right, and Chris, did we pass 8,000? Where are we at? 1,900 views.
It's reached over 8,000 people, just
8,000,
1,900
okay.
views.
Okay, so we have lots of people on the internet. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it, but we do need to pay attention to our use of microphones, especially during question and answer. So we're going to plan on going through our speakers. As soon as one is done, we'll go to the next one, and we'll do like we did at the end of the last session and bring them up before the break and do question and answer time then. Tonight, our opening reception is at 5:30. It's next door in F and G at 5:30 over there. The sessions, the PowerPoints from this morning's sessions are all on the IRCP website. So it's IRCP, that's short for International Roundtable on Community Paramedicine. I'm told if you leave out one of those letters, you'll end up somewhere you don't want to be. IRCP.info, INFO. And then if you click on Meetings and Las Vegas, you'll have the PowerPoints from this morning. They're already posted. But we won't get the video up until next week sometime. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Peter O'Meara from La Trobe University in Australia. And Peter, I think, is next in line after me for having attended the most IRPC sessions. So, Peter, thank you for being part of our meeting. Down is next, up is previous, and the one in the middle is the pointer.
Right, I've received my directions now. This is really a continuation of Duncan's talk before lunch. It's not about a community paramedic program, it's about an education program. But it's an education program that's been influenced greatly by community paramedicine. As Gary said, I've been coming to these community paramedicine programs for a long time, I think for about 12 years. I've managed to miss 2 in that time, 2 of them in Victoria, in Australia, and that wasn't very smart. For various reasons. So what I'm going to talk about now is one paramedic program. It's a bit like community paramedic programs. If you look at university programs in Australia, they're all different. And you can't generalise, and there are people from other programs here, and feel free to talk to them about their programs and their experiences, because they will be slightly different. So this is the story about ours and how it was influenced by community paramedicine over a number of years, and there's been a continuing evolution of our program. Been a bit perplexing sometimes that we think we've got it right, and then along comes the federal government and they have regulations on things and you can't do things. Then the university will have a rule that says you can't do something, and paramedics aren't that good at following rules. And if I get this to work. Not working, Gary. We'll try arrows. There we are. So what I'm going to talk about is the contextual drivers for the changes in paramedic education. We'll look at some typical paramedicine curricula not in detail, just an overview from what I was able to find on the internet. And we'll talk about our response at La Trobe University, look at our curriculum and what our future plans will be. And then if you want to ask questions, you can. It was really nice to see when Duncan gave his talk that there were lots of questions. So feel free to ask questions. If we run out of time, I'm going to be around the whole conference. So there's nothing new in this. The contextual drivers of the ageing population, we've seen a number of presentations on that. It's not different in Australia to here or the UK or any developed country. The community's expectations are changing. They expect a professional service. They don't expect you to just turn up and throw them in the back of the ambulance and take them to hospital. That's not what people want. All of us are facing health system challenges of varying degrees. In Australia, we're going through a process where the federal government has just reviewed health insurance and they've put out a proposal. So we've got that in common with the US, although your system's somewhat more messy, shall we say. The other thing that's driving change is technological innovation, and we've seen a lot of that in paramedicine over the years. When I started in the ambulance service, there was no such thing as a portable defibrillator, and I can remember one of my colleagues doing a case where the local doctor said we should monitor this patient on the way to hospital, so they put the monitor in the car and ran a cord out to a generator in the back of his sports car. So it was a bit of a different system in those days. And that was pretty extreme even at that time. So what we're seeing is changing paramedic roles and changing scopes of practice. And also we're seeing, as some of the other speakers said, a greater integration of paramedics into the system. Now, when we go to ED now, we're actually accepted as professionals. People actually take some notice of what we say. They don't ignore what we say. The patient didn't get injured in the emergency department. You've all had that, there's a few nods. I can remember when I trained where a surgeon asked for the patient care record from the ambulance, and the registrar who'd been in ED with this patient tried to get out of it by making all sorts of excuses, and in the end he admitted that he'd actually thrown it in the bin, and the surgeon made him get out of the theatre and go down to the rubbish and get it out and bring it back. It was highly humiliating for him, and it was highly amusing for me. So things are changing. And we see that with community paramedics. This is a community paramedic vehicle in a place in central Victoria where I live, which is about 2 hours north of Melbourne. And they service a number of communities, and they're rolling it out across the state. So typical curriculum for the US. Now, I apologise in advance if I've got this wrong. This is what is publicly available. So it's not about my knowledge of what's there. This I actually found on a website, which is written down, as I should do as an academic. And I acknowledge that the National Association of EMS Educators do have standards on these things, but I'm not going through them because I'm not an expert. But this is a fairly typical curricula in the US for associate degrees and degrees. I understand there's something like about a dozen degree programs in the US. It might be more. It's a bit hard to work that out. And you'll see the difference in our type of program. In Australia, we have Australia and New Zealand. I think we have about 17 programs. David Waters might know better than me, but I think it's 17 universities provide entry-level education in Australia. How are you going there, Anne? Yeah. Trying to get it clear? Now, I'm not going to click on all these links. They're for you to look at later. But these are 5 typical programs. By luck, I didn't pick the 2 Queensland programs that are represented here today. But they're all different. That's the point I'm making. The Victoria University program is one of the longer established programs, and they actually try and incorporate a fair bit of public health into their program, but they only have ambulance service placements because getting placements elsewhere is quite difficult. But they do try and actually have a social approach to paramedicine. Flinders University, which I think someone mentioned earlier, they have an established 3-year program. It's very biomedical, very biomedical. Monash University is also one of the foundation universities, if you like. There are 3 of them. And one of the interesting things is that they have a core first year. So their first year is done with other health professionals. And it has quite a number of public health subjects. It's a strong clinical focus, and they do have an honours program available. For those who don't know what an honours program is in the Australian context, it's actually the training you need to get into a a doctoral program for a research degree. And sometimes different in other countries and doesn't exist in some countries. But it's a 4th year. Charles Sturt University is also one of the foundation programs, which Bill Lord, sitting up the back, was really the father of. I could say grandfather. And I actually followed Bill to the same university, so we've both got a connection with that. It's very well established. They're changing their program next year to also offer an honours program in their 4th year. And the 5th one I have here is from Queensland University of Technology in Queensland. And like all the Queensland programs, they seem to have access to more clinical placements than the rest of us, certainly in the southern states. And that's a characteristic of their programs. And they also offer a double degree with nursing. So it becomes a 4.5 year program. There are a few around. There's some that were started and have now stopped, but it's another approach. So you can see that even amongst those 5, there's a lot of variation. And if I went through all 17, which I'm sure you wouldn't want me to, you'll see even more variation. But all these programs are actually accredited nationally and meet the same basic core standards. So that's the context. So our response is that we looked at these driving factors, and we also had some other drivers as well. University programs in Australia have to comply with they call the AQF, the Australian Qualification Framework. We also have a whole lot of university rules. And our program has been a double degree with public health for the last few years. And we actually discovered that, contrary to the advice we'd got at the time, we didn't comply with some university rules. So we had to change the program, and we then had to try and find out how to do it. Now, one option was to keep doing what we were doing, but compromise the paramedic side of the degree program. We made a different decision, which I'll come to. But the way we went about it, we used what they call the Paris framework, which is an implementation science approach. We collected relevant data, we did research, we looked at other programs and looked at the literature. We reviewed and analysed it, and then we went through a curriculum development program, which I will go through a little bit about what we came up with, and then the implementation, which of course we're really starting. And I'm not going to go through what we've done so far because it's really a whole bunch of bureaucratic steps. Getting a course approved in an Australian university anyway is a very long-term process. It does not happen overnight. So this is what we did with our curriculum development. We came up with a 4-year program, a Bachelor of Paramedic Practice with honours. And what we decided to do was have 2 streams of honours. We based it on an existing pharmacy program, which was about 100 metres where our school is, and they've been doing it for a number of years. We believe this program will actually meet the accreditation requirements. It should, because it hasn't changed the content that much. It's still got strong public health content, and all the students need to do the 4 years. The Monash program and the CSU program, the students can opt out after the 3 years, which most will, and then they come back and do honours separately. We're saying all students will do honours. And we actually looked at the 2 pathways. We think that probably about maybe 5%, 10% of the students will do an honours with research, and the rest will do a clinical honours. So if you want to look further, you can look on the website at the course program. And we've also written a paper which has been published on how we went through this whole process and what we came up with. We're also looking at developing a postgraduate program in community paramedicine. Where's Neil? Is he still here? This is what we want you to take on. And anyone else who wants to. And it's built from the undergraduate program. And there's a whole lot of really good reasons for that. So this is our vision, which I won't read to you, you can read it yourself. I guess the big message here is that what we're looking at is not trying to provide an education for paramedics for today, it's actually about the future. I want paramedic graduates to come out so that when I'm the patient, they know what they're doing. And I hope that sometime in the distant future. So it's about the future, not about today. So this is what we've come up with. This is the clinical course structure that we've come up with. And if I can work out how to use this thing, we'll point at various things. What's different from our previous program, which is, it worked a minute ago, Gary. It's gone flat. What we've done, we've got a foundation studies year in the first year. And the students, when they come in, they actually sit in the same class as dentists and physios, speech pathology students, occupational therapists, nurses, public health, and social workers. So they do the same first year. What we've done, we've been able to get the university to relax its stance on this a little bit, and we now have a paramedic subject in first year, which we think is necessary to actually determine whether these students really want to be a paramedic. Because it's a bit late when they get to second year and they could have changed courses. So we're trying to do that, and we're going to offer that subject in summer so that students transferring from other courses can actually enter our second year. But we have this situation after first year where people can apply to change courses, and we have many more applications to get into paramedicine than get out, which is good, but we need to prepare them properly. The second year, we start to get into paramedic subjects, and no, it still doesn't work. And you can see that the course is about 50-50. There's introduction to paramedic practice, there's and there's a trauma subject, but there are other subjects that are taught by paramedics. The law and management and health subject is taught by a paramedic. Integrating evidence into practice is taught by a paramedic. Communication skills in healthcare is taught by a paramedic. And we do actually teach some other students in these subjects as well, but essentially they're paramedic subjects. And they don't do a lot of placements, they do a couple of days. And again, that's really to sort out whether people really want to be a paramedic. And the other thing is, because placements are so hard to get, they're a very precious resource. And to waste them on students who don't go on seems a bit silly. So that's just the reality of the situation. When they enter the third year, it becomes paramedic dominated and the placements start. They also do placements in other settings from third year on. In third year, they do placements in aged care as the first placement, and do some ambulance placements in that year. And these particular students do rural health, and they do gerontology, which is, when you look at those stats what people were showing earlier, it makes sense that we should be doing gerontology. Our traditional courses have spent an awful lot of time teaching about acute care for a very small percentage of the patients, and not very much training at all about gerontology and related topics. So it's fairly, traditional in third year. Fourth year is quite different. We've added in death, dying and grief. There's not a lot of paramedic programs in Australia that do that. We have major incident management, which is fairly common. In fact, we're doing it this week. I'm not there, so someone else is doing that very well. We use a thing called a Mergo train, and it's multidisciplinary. We have staff from the base hospital coming and being part of the training this year, and the emergency services. So it's quite good. Advanced clinical management, which is an introduction to intensive care paramedicine. Professional practice consolidation is a fairly general subject about professionalism. And in first semester, we have a mental health subject, and that includes a 2-week placement in a mental health facility. Extended care paramedicine, which is sort of the UK sort of term for community paramedics and another subject called community paramedic practice, and that involves placements with GPs. At this stage, we're just trialling it, and we only got a few days. And they also do ambulance placements, obviously, in that year. So that's the honours program clinical. So that's the one approach. And this is the one that relates more to community paramedicine. It's got public health, it's got community paramedic subjects, it's got rural health, which, as Susan said, is where we've sort of conceptually placed community paramedicine, even though it's not quite right. And this is the honours program that's to do with research. What we've done is we've replaced rural health with research methods. This is a postgraduate subject, and then a research project in 4th year. And this is really a pathway to get a small number of paramedics to take up doing PhDs and similar. As I said before, I think we only really expect about 5% of the students to take this pathway. Now, in the future, what we'd like to do is have a postgraduate program. And because of the structure of our undergrad, we're able to take subjects directly from that program and put them into a postgrad program. At the moment, our thinking is maybe a grad cert, maybe a grad dip, we're not quite sure. Either way, we're talking about it integrating into a Master of Public Health down in the future. But at this stage we're unsure, and I'd be really pleased to get some feedback, actually, particularly from the ambulance services in Australia and New Zealand, about which way we should go, because we're unsure. And but we think that we can do it. We've sort of put down what we think might be in a grad cert and a grad diploma, but we're fairly open. All these subjects are taken from the actual program, the undergrad program. So what we're doing, we're taking a bit of a risk where we're setting up a 4-year program in an environment where most of the programs are 3 years. So we're taking some sort of risk in terms of student numbers. And will students come for a 4-year program? Well, so far they have. And our demand as of last week was actually higher than it's been. So we're doing something right in terms of marketing at least. And we'll just see, whether it works. I'm a believer in diversity, so I'm not suggesting that every university program should look like ours. I know we have some advocates in our country that think everyone else's program should be based on theirs. That's incorrect. I think that there needs to be some core standards, but there also needs to be some diversity and some creativity. So, if you're going down the degree course, I'd certainly personally argue for a 4-year program, but other people will disagree with me. But the big thing is be prepared to take some risks, because otherwise you'll just produce the old vocational college programs with a different title on them. Take the opportunity to produce a different type of graduate. And as Duncan said, I have a koala too. So, any questions? You're all dumbstruck. We're doing it as a group, I'm told. You've spoken.
Thank you.
I'll leave.
Yeah, but stick around.
Right.
Neil. So we have Mr. Kirby back. Neil, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you.
This,
Do you want some lapel mic?
if we get it on, it's turned on.
Uh-oh. Hold on a second. Island broke. There we go. So, next, previous.
Well, I'm back, and I know it's after lunch, so there is only pictures in this presentation. So, to something different. Look, the purpose of this presentation, which I'll warn you now is going to push my time limit, so I'll go through it as quickly as I can, is to really look at what is the, internationally around the world, what is the direction that EMS, ambulance, paramedicine is going, and what can we take from different opportunities that we can have from that. So that's the objective of where we want to go. I started in the ambulance about 39 years ago, and all through my early days of being in the ambulance, I was told the 4 biggest ambulance services in the world were the London Ambulance Service, the British Columbian Ambulance Service, Queensland Ambulance Service, and New South Wales Service. And I believed that for a long time. I believed it until I started to come to IRCP meetings and to see that there was life outside of that. And that was really quite a narrow view that Australians took on what were the bigger services. Even as recently as a couple of years ago, Queensland is still claiming that they're in that big 4 that we have. And my international experience says, there's maybe just some other things we need to look at. Are there other players out there on the global market? I'm sure if you talk to anyone from Falk, they'll have a point to make about who is the biggest ambulance service. They own 2,500 ambulances. They're the largest international fleet, they tell me, on their website. They provide ambulance services in 22 countries. They're Europe's largest provider and the 3rd largest in the USA. So maybe they feel that they've got a bit of space to claim as the world's biggest ambulance service. Then you've got some names familiar to a lot of the people in this room, and in 2017, only earlier this year, the amalgamation of all this talks about servicing 5 million patients, 46 states and the DC, 36,000 staff. So maybe they want to be on the list of the world's biggest ambulance services. So, but who does have the world's biggest ambulance? Not that it matters, but who does have the world's biggest ambulance service? If you ask this guy, he would tell you he does. Well, you can't ask him, he's dead. But before he died, if you asked him, Abdul Sadar Eddy would have told you that he has the world's biggest ambulance service. He was the founder of the Eddy Foundation in Pakistan, and his fleet of ambulance services is said to be the world's largest volunteer ambulance service with 1,500 ambulances. So he might claim to be the largest ambulance service. Go across the border, you get into India, GVK, they claim to have 10,000 ambulances, 11,000 ambulances. They do 26,000 emergency calls per day. They certainly want to claim to be the largest ambulance service. And there's other big companies that operate, and I'll talk about emergency a bit later on, in India, all claim to be great. What's the point of all that exercise? The point of all that exercise is we meet here as an international conference. We meet to talk globally. But I'm wondering if we in fact are taking the global picture. Are we looking really what globally is there out there to offer? Because there's a lot in ambulance or EMS or paramedicine around the world which I don't think we're being exposed to. I want to focus today on the Middle East because of my experience there, and I asked the question, is it the sleeping giant? And I just want to start with a little bit of perspective of where we are. We've come this week to join in the EMS World Expo, the largest EMS event in North America. We're told that there's about 3,000 people coming to the conference over the next week, 370 trade displays. I just want to compare that to Arab Health, an annual event that's held in Dubai, January of each year. They have 100,000 more attendees at that event, 103,000 attendees. There's 4,200 trade displays, 15 times what we'll see here this week. There's 17 conferences attached to the Arab Health exercise, and there's 150 countries participating, 3 times of what will be here this week. So I just put to you, who has the global look at EMS in the world? Now, the one thing I'll say to you about that presentation is that it's all of health, everything from a bedpan to a brain surgery to whatever you want, but there are literally hundreds of stands amongst those 4,200 that focus on ambulance and EMS delivery around the world. So there's a lot to see, and it's all in the Middle East and all separate from what we're looking at here. So who are the Middle East players? Now, ambulance is in development in the Middle East. That's true. There's places in the Middle East where there's no ambulance service or very basic ambulance service. I would put to you the three biggest or most sophisticated is Hamad Corporation in Qatar, the Dubai Ambulance Corporation where I worked, and the Abu Dhabi service. They're the three big players. There's a fourth player that's come into the scene in the UAE called the National Ambulance Company, a private-public partnership, stemming from a company in Australia, but they're yet to get a foothold in the major service providers that exist there on the service delivery. I want to give tribute firstly to Hamad Medical Corporation in Qatar. Penny Price, who was on the very first IRCP meeting. I don't think Penny is not around. She doesn't. Ontario. She's in Ontario now. She actually started this service back 25 years or so ago. Built it from nothing into a very advanced and sophisticated service operating in Qatar, in Doha, and probably is one of the most experienced and sophisticated services that operate. I was over at Dubai, and I was only in Dubai because of IRCP. In 2008, I attended the IRCP meeting in Victoria, Canada. I made the mistake one morning tea as I walked past. Mr. Bob Waddell is sitting down in the back row now. And Bob said, I've got something for you, He said, I recommended you to a friend for a job. Where, Bob? In Dubai. Bob, I can't go to Dubai. He said, oh, well, I've recommended, they'll be in contact with you. So he did. I got this email from Bob's mate in Dubai, and Bob had sent him that I was interested in this job, and this email, this is in the motel room in Victoria in Canada. I get this message, it said, please send us your CV. So you got your laptop there, you got your files there, it's attached, quick send. So I did it. I sent this thing. This is a true story. About 20 minutes later, my wife rings from Australia. She said, hello, dear, what have you been doing? Nothing. I haven't done that. She said, well, what did you do? Nothing. No. Oh, well, one little thing I did. And 2 weeks later, we were working in Dubai. So that's how I ended up in Dubai, all because of IRCP and Bob Waddell. What did I like about Dubai? It's the only job I've had where I get to wear a dress to work. That was quite basic. I even got to lead the Arabic cane dance, but I got sacked from that job. I was sent back because I kept dropping the cane. So I gave that away and just continued to be the only one that wore a suit where everyone else wore a dress. But spent 8 years there being involved in the Dubai Corporation for Ambulance Services and saw a lot of growth over the Middle East period in that time of ambulance services, what we provide. So I'm going to take you through a bit of just a snapshot look of what Dubai Ambulance looks like, but I want to try and highlight through that, particularly from a community paramedic program, why it has developed the way it is and what it's trying to achieve in terms of how. As you can see, it has a very mixed fleet, like every one of you parade your fleets would have a similar mix of fleet. One of the things they did was specialise in different services. So their community paramedic approach, and remember, I put to you what is the driver of why we have a community program. And I'm going to work on one assumption, the assumption that's driving a lot of our plans in Australia, and that is the assumption of managing demand. Why do we have a community paramedic program? Because we want to manage demand. So this is how Dubai went about managing demand. They created these specialised services. I presented a paper at an IRCP meeting about this project a few years back. We call it the Mama Ambulance, affectionately the Mama Ambulance. It's the neonatal and obstetrics unit, totally female crew. So both the paramedics are female and the driver. So in terms of background, the basic ambulance crewing in Dubai is one driver and two medics, paramedics, using the German term. They're called medics over there. And the male is predominantly, the driver is predominantly male. It's about a 47% ratio of females in the medic workforce, but we created this all-medic crew. Dramatically changed the uptake of patients who would call an ambulance for emergency childbirth. A lot of it was crossing the cultural issue of being dealt with by females in that crew. Since I've left, they've actually expanded it to their first responders having specialised female crew because the public like that. There are certain publics that would like to have a female come. The reality is 40% of the medics are female anyway, but the concept of a female car has managed that specific demand and takes them out of the general emergency response unit capability that we have. They implemented the emergency doctor. The emergency doctor was designed around managing low acuity work. So yeah, sure, when the big job was on, the doctor would turn up and do things that doctors do at big jobs. But for most of the time, they would worry about the 40% of cases that may not need to go to the hospital. If they could get to the scene, manage the case, give them what they needed, it prevented that person going to the emergency department. The other thing they do is identify where is my likelihood of cases? Where do I need to concentrate cases on? And so they would create dedicated service units to meet that demand, again with the objective of can I manage them on site without needing to transport. Anyone pass through Dubai Airport? Anyone been through Dubai Airport? They claim to be the busiest airport in the world. 80 million people per year pass through the airport. Totally an international airport, so you've got the problems of the immigration barrier and things like that. Think of your airports that's closest to you. How many medics do you roster to the airport to work inside the airport? Any figures? Anyone operate anyone? Paramedics in the airport? In Dubai Airport, I used to roster 178 full-time paramedics to the airport. There's 15 full-time 24/7 paramedic stations inside the Dubai Airport. So 80 million people passing through the airport. They've created as a city on their own, dedicated resource, manage the people in the airport. Very few people need to be transported outside of the airport. There's other samples of that around Dubai of other dedicated services they have. If you're a first responder in Dubai, you've got nice cars to drive. They were pretty impressive. They were good. And I'm sure you've all got things such as this, specialised transport vehicles. So I'm sure a lot of you have your bike medics, your motorbikes. So there's a real thought, if I'm going to provide the medic resource to the location, what's going to be the best design method of doing that? We are in a desert, so there's a lot of a range of desert vehicles that where I couldn't take a normal ambulance, we designed something that was desert friendly. As an extension of those dedicated services was a special unit that would take care of event management. So a number of major events are being held in Dubai, such as New Year's Eve on the right there, things like the Dubai World Cup, things of that nature. We would provide dedicated services to. Both of these events would have close to 100 paramedics rostered to the event. Things like the Dubai Air Show that ran over a whole week would have a crew attached to it. So we would establish on site a clinic, responding crews, all internally servicing the event, again with the purpose of where you've got large crowds, manage the crowd, manage the conditions. Particularly a lot of them are public health issues, as you know, at event coverage, everything from headaches to minor injuries, manage them on site. We avoid the transportation to major hospitals. I'll talk about our buses later that we had, but where if there wasn't a clinic available on site, we'd set up our buses as a clinic. On the top left-hand picture there is just one of the pre-events, one of the crews that were going to operate there getting their briefing. The one down the right-hand side was taken on New Year's Eve. They're the doctors that would come on board. We'd have the doctors come out from the hospital with the whole focus about managing the patient on site and only those patients that really need an ED department going off site. In terms of vehicles, they were very much embraced the smart ambulance concept. They worked with Furno particularly, a lot of you would know Furno, in developing a smart ambulance compact package. So all those things about a smart ambulance that you'll see over at the display at the expo later on, solar powered support for them, the non-lifting stretcher, so there's a complete ergonomic support for your medics, the vehicle command brain, modulated fit out, those things that you're familiar with, they very much embraced And in fact, since I've left over there, one of their objectives is to go into the ambulance building market and create these in the Middle East market. A lot of you would be familiar with Aztec. There's other facilities around like that that provide the brain to an ambulance. They were very much, all the ambulances in Dubai were fitted with this. We could do everything of tracking idling time, speed, oxygen levels, anything you want about a vehicle we would track. We'd get alerts to the managers through web-based things. So if an ambulance sped, the manager would get an alert to let him know that. If the car was idling too long, we could turn the car off from the control room. All those things that come with vehicle management. We probably all use electronic patient records. They introduced them a decade or so ago, just before I arrived over there. So we had the typical EPCR. We could transmit the ECG to the hospital prior to arrival, web-based. So as soon as the medics entered the sheet, entered a case and any information on the case, it appeared on that. And anyone then who had web access to that could open the case, read the ECG, do whatever they need to, even if the patient hadn't arrived at hospital. Many of you in this room have gone down that pathway and you look at that and say, we've done that. But they've done a very, very smart thing over there of late. They've taken their ECP, we've had that in place for a number of years, but the hospital just introduced an electronic record system, the EPIC system they've got. I've heard mention to it earlier in today. So when the Dubai hospital system introduced the EPIC system, we have our EPR system. As part of the implementation of that, we integrated the two. And earlier this year, this was the day it launched, that in fact our eCPR loads directly into the EPIC system. And what was a real coup for us, it's got a reverse current. So from the EPIC system, we load onto the EPCR, patient medication, patient history, patient whatever. There were fields we would get from the EPIC system in the hospital directly through to the EPCR, which was very good indeed. One thing about living in the Middle of the East is you get a lot of experience with MCI and disasters. And people often, I'm sure they say to you, don't they? People say to you, what's the worst job, the biggest job you've ever done? If everyone asks me, what's your 10 biggest jobs? I can assure you 15 of them were while I was in Dubai. It was that type of place. This is probably the worst road crash I've ever done in my career. Got caught out early on a Sunday morning. This is me on the front page of the paper where we had 13 dead. It was typical of the MCI approach that we would get over there. Vehicle-wise, it wasn't the biggest. It was the biggest fatality-wise. The biggest accident we've had over there was this one, 256 vehicles in it. It was before my time. I did go to this one with 58 vehicles in it. So it was very regular occurrence to get major events of that nature. We had a lot of fires. These are all fires that I attended in my time. I've never seen a ball of flame this huge. This is a building here, so just get that in respect to the size of the building. Somewhere there's a factory ablaze in this thick cloud here, and I've never been so scared in going to a job. This is the smoke from a fire, and I'm still 20 kilometres or so from this fire, and it was a factory fire, and everyone was self-evacuating from the community. So if they're self-evacuating, why are we going in? You know, this is a bit crazy, isn't it? Anyway, they're all. So we had a lot of major fires, and of course, a lot of you probably be familiar with the Address Hotel fire, which was New Year's Eve in 2015. One of those events that I spoke to you about, where we had about 100 medics on site. So you got to understand where this is. This is you'll see a photo in a short while where this was. It's around what they call the Dubai downtown area. Directly opposite this hotel is the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, which is the centre of the New Year's fireworks display. And so there's about 1 million people. They get 1 million plus people in that area around the thing to do the New York thing. Just below this, just about down here somewhere, we had one of our first aid stations, and we'd just gone around and done the inspection, and we get a call to say that there's a report that there's a fire at the Address Hotel. So we look around and we find the fire, and this is what we initially saw. And I looked at that and thought, well, why isn't someone going up there with a fire extinguisher and get that out? It's pretty small, let's get it out. In the seconds that we were looking at it, this awning above the thing caught alight. And within seconds, there's only seconds between that and that shot, the fire spread up the wall. It took 47 seconds to get the 63 floors up the entire building. And we realised then we had a major disaster on our hands. 1 million people, a skyscraper on fire, and a big response. So what does that... And this is the area that I told you about. So here's the world's tallest building, just under 1 kilometre high. It's got a lake here. There's a big fountain on there, designed on the Bellagio type thing, which is across the road, 3 times bigger. Just tell the Los Angeles people that this one's 3 times bigger than theirs. But anyway, and this was the fire. You can see that the fire gutted this entire hotel on the far side, but not this side. Very effective fire doors shut up the centre of the thing. So you stood on this side of the hotel, there's no sign of a fire. On the other side it was raging. But this was the main entrance to the hotel down here. And this is where the command forward post was set up. And at 2 a.m. I'm in the foyer of this hotel with 63 floors of raging fire above me. And we're having a meeting in the foyer. And I said, look, I've watched all the videos of 9/11. I really don't feel comfortable being here. No, it's safe, it's safe. Well, it won't fall down, It didn't fall down, so it was safe. But what that is, and just before I left, Emirates airline had a mishap on landing at Dubai Airport. The actual patient safety aspect of this is extremely good. We never had one fatality at any of those high-rise fires, including the Address Hotel. There were no fatalities in this instance, and the response is very good because the outcome of patient care is very good in those respects, is because they've had such an experience of many of the MCIs. The MCI response and capability they have is really second to none. So they have a great MCI resource area. There's 6 of these trucks carrying spinal boards, oxygen cylinders and things of that nature. We can put over 1,000 people on a stretcher at an incident if needs be. And of course we've got I just want to make sure I did. Yep, all right. There's lots and lots of work going into drills over there. The staff are drilled to the nth degree over and over again. I don't know how you do it here, but typical scenarios in Australia is we do a drill. We actually do it pretty badly. You all sit in a room and congratulate each other how well they went, and you pack up and you go home and you don't do it again for another year, where you pull it out and you probably do it just as badly, and you sit in a room and congratulate everyone how well you did. And we never practice what the learnings that we got from that. Over there, they vary. If you did the drill wrong, you did it again, and did it again, and did it again, until the outcome of what you were drilling was right. The other thing, a lot of the drills are done blind. It's not uncommon to... medics or staff, fire, police, ambulance weren't notified that it was a drill. You just got called to an incident, you responded, and you were assessed. You didn't know until you got there that it was a drill. So they do a lot of exercises. The pre-event planning, this was in fact the Supreme Committee that was looking after the New Year's Eve that later was to have the fire. We met for several weeks prior to the event. Everything's planned out and worked well, and on the night everything worked to clockwork, and you would have thought that the fire that we had was just routine in terms of the response to it. The resources that they have there in terms of both the physical resources, which is carried in the truck, so all the, as I said, we've got these disaster trucks that carry all the supply equipment, and then we have our fleet of buses, which is commonly called the disaster buses. This one, if you look up the Guinness Book of Records, is the world's largest ambulance, according to the Guinness Book of Records, and we have a fleet of 3 buses, all designed quite differently. They're set up inside, depending on what the bus is, with operating theatres, ICU units, X-ray, ultrasound, or just pure straight-out patient transport, depending on the style of the bus and what you want. So we use them, as I said, for standby at the major events. We use them in terms of an MCI response. I've never seen them used to do surgery and things like that in that overwhelming situation, but where they are used, I'm about to show you, very regularly. In the old days of responding to the MCI, when we had these accidents of 20, 30, 50 cars or big fires, things like that, we'd send a fleet of ambulances because we'd have 20, 30, 40, 50 patients that we had to move. And so this was not an uncommon sight at an ambulance to see all the ambulances responded. Where have those ambulances come from? They've come from the stations providing emergency service to the rest of the community. So if they're all lined up out here attending the MCI, what's providing coverage to the rest of the community in the town? Nothing. So the modern day response is this. This accident was about 28 vehicles from memory. We attended to it with 3 ambulances and the bus. So over there, patients are rated as either code red, code yellow, code green. We would get a rough count on how many code reds, yellows and greens we had. You would send your ambulances for your reds, particularly probably your yellows, but all your greens would be transported using the bus. And so all these ambulances that you see parked over here stayed on their ambulance site, on their station, responding to the community as it did. This was a fire up here in this apartment block. We send the bus. All your green patients have to be assessed in the bus. It becomes your on-site clinic. And again, you only end up taking to hospital those that you need to take to hospital. If you do need to take these to hospital, the bus can be used to transport them. I once showed this slide to a presentation similar to this, and someone was quite critical of that and said, well, that's bad. That's really disaster management, bad planning. Why is that? I said, because that means all your patients are going to arrive at the one hospital. My response was, mate, it's a bus. You stop at one hospital, let some patients off, and you move to the next hospital, let some patients off, and you keep going until you've distributed your patients as you need to accordingly. The other thing that's become very become a major focus within the Middle East is an education on development and learning, not just clinical. So this is our local paramedics over there. This was actually on a visit to Australia, actually, but they're very keen on their simulation training that they do here and classroom training both. And as I said, even went to Australia one day expanding there. This is management training. This is the management team. Let me just put one myth away in terms of like the Middle East. People think your management over there is male. Is not the case. In fact, there were more females in management in Dubai Corporation of Ambulance than what there was in QAS when I left it in Queensland. The manager of finance was a female, manager of HR was female, manager of procurement was female, management of quality was a female, strategic development was a female. So you go into the management, your management meeting, and there was quite often a majority of females. So quite different to what a lot of people's perception of what the Middle East might be. A lot of then development, and I show those slides for the reason to say what they're planning on in terms of where they see their future in terms of developing the expertise that's in the service. Along with that goes a great desire to become a hub for paramedicine training. Both here and in India, there is a strong push to create the Middle East as a hub for training of paramedics. The National Ambulance Company are in partnership here with one particular university, so is Dubai Ambulance and others, trying to set up partnerships to develop paramedic education. So what is the future? This slide, I often share this slide for another purpose. I often give talks on the stupidity of response times, about how we measure response times and what we measure when an ambulance pulls up at the front door, correct? Is that how you measure your times here, when the ambulance arrives at the scene? And what a stupid thing to measure, because that's not an indicator of where your care arrived at the patient. And to me, this was the classic example that I pulled up at the front door of the Burj Khalifa. I finished my response time, I clock off my response time, but I've still got a kilometre to go to the patient. If the patient's up the top. So it's just a ridiculous indicator, isn't it? But anyway, that's just the slide. I've got the time to share the story. I just want to, because I think this sums up a little bit about where the vision of the Middle East goes. I don't know if you've heard the story of you've probably all heard about the Palm Island that Dubai built about 10 years or so ago. But what's interesting is the story of it. The person who was made chair of the committee was called into Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum's office one day. He's the ruler of Dubai. He was the crown prince at the time. Called him into the office and said, "We need to prepare for the future of Dubai, the development of Dubai. And the future is going to be around tourism, bringing people through Dubai as a point of thing. So we want to create a tourist thing. But there's a problem with Dubai. It's 70 kilometres long. From border to border, it's only 70 k's. They said, we want more beach. Go and create us more beach. So this committee went away and they designed an island, 5 kilometre diameter island. But they know how Sheikh Mohammed works, and they knew Sheikh Mohammed would probably want something bigger than that. So they put in a second plan in their drawer that they would pull out if it needs be. So they come to the big unveiling to Sheikh Mohammed, and they put this map of this 5 kilometre diameter island on the thing. He said, very nice, very good, I like it. He said, but I want it bigger. And I said, well, look what we've got for you. So they bring out the big plan, this big 20 kilometre island. He said, no. He said, I want more. And I said, Sheikh, well, how big do you want it? He said, I want 70 kilometres of beach. He said, I want to replicate what we've got now. I want another 70 kilometres of beach. Your Highness, in due respect, do you know how big an island has to be to give you 70 kilometres of beach? And he said one of those profound statements which I quote to every leadership. I tell this story every time I do leadership talk. He just looked at them and he said one sentence. He said, no one told you to think of a circle. And that's where the palm come from. How do you get 70 kilometres of beach in an island that's a 5 kilometre diameter? It's a perfect example of thinking outside the square, thinking innovatively of what you can do to get what you need to do. And that's how Dubai got its Palm Island, how I can create 70 kilometres of beach, following all the palms in my 5 kilometre diameter circle. So with that in mind, I go to where the future is and where we're going. First thing I want to mention about apps. I'm sure a lot of you are looked into apps. I'm sure that there's apps that are going to be on display over at the conference, that you'll see apps on display. I just want to mention where this particular one that come out of India. I haven't heard of it now for about 12 months. I don't know if it's still on the go or not, but it was launched in Dubai. It's actually an Indian company. What was interesting about was this approach of this particular app. Their aim, as you can see, their aim is to make fast emergency medical assistance available through the mobile phone anytime, anywhere, across the entire world by 2020. Originally designed for places like India and Pakistan where access to healthcare is pretty poor, but the concept of this is bypassing your regulated ambulance services. Having an app where any first responder who wants to nominate, doctor, nurse, anyone can nominate, and I can just get my assistance immediately through an app without going directly to an ambulance service. Both Forbes and UBS both describe this as a potential industry disruptor. And one of them was quoted as saying, this will do to ambulance services what Uber did to taxi services. So I just put it on the thing in terms of, be it this app or another app in the future, things like this will change our service dramatically in some countries that we're provided, if it develops the way some people are predicting it are. I'll leave you with some stories of innovation that's come out of Dubai. Dubai have announced their plans for their first air taxi, this pilotless taxi that will pick you up from wherever you are, in the front of your hotel here, and take you to where else when you need to go to. Ambulance are looking at their concept of that, how they can use the same vehicle concept as your air ambulance that can arrive outdoor, pick you up, take you to the emergency department. If this week, some of you probably have seen this week, Dubai Police this week, go onto YouTube, go onto the Dubai Police site when you finish here, have just launched their first air motorbike response, motorbike cycle cop. So this is a motorbike that lifts up, flies through the air. Ambulance already looking at it as their ambulance first responder. Use motorbike, combination of drone, get the person around immediately. On the books, not in ambulance yet, but certainly in police and transport, police looking at where it may go. So my question to you is in terms of the Middle East, is the giant awakening? Is the Middle East about to give us something in EMS that we haven't had before in the coming year. To finish off, I'm going to go a bit over time here, but I'll leave you with 3 examples. You've heard of Emirates Airlines. Emirates Airlines does half a dozen flights into Australia a day. I don't know how many into US, but it's probably about that, half a dozen flights per day. What people often don't know is that Emirates trades under 50 different trade names. One of them is flight catering. And under their flight catering unit, they actually operate at 62 airports worldwide. They operate in 12 countries. They prepare 120,000 meals a day. If you got to this conference by air, chances are you ate an Emirates meal. Dubai is 2 million people in a country that's 70 kilometres long. Just keep that in the back of your mind of where they reach out from. You heard of Donata. Donata is another way of spelling Emirates. They offer ground handling, cargo and transport. They operate in 5 continents, 84 countries, 38,000 employees. In USA airports, they work out of Atlanta, Austin, Boston, Chicago, O'Hare, Dallas, Fort Worth, Detroit, El Paso, Grand Rapids, Houston, Indianapolis, blah, 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 San Diego, San Francisco. Blah, blah, blah. If you flew to this conference, chances are your bags were handled by Emirates. You heard of Dubai World. Dubai World runs the Dubai ports, the seaport at Dubai. It owns or has controlling contracts for seaports in 31 countries, including China, Hong Kong, India, Thailand, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, United Kingdom. If you sent cargo by sea, chances are it's been managed by Dubai World. Last example, Godolphin, world's largest, most successful global racing team, the private racing company, business of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. Godolphin has its headquarters in Dubai, where it has several stables. It has stables in the United Kingdom, Sydney and Melbourne. It has independent trainers in Great Britain, Australia, France, USA and Ireland. It's won 4,000 races internationally. It's been the leading owner at the Dubai World Cup for 10 consecutive years. It's the leading British championship on over 11 occasions, and it's previously been crowned the North American top owner. If you've ever put a bet on a horse, chances are it was a Godolphin horse. So for a little country, 2 million people, or little state, it's only a state of a country, that's called an emirate, that's 2 million people, 70 kilometres in length, it bats well above its weight. So I would say to you, in terms of the awakening giant, that EMS needs to watch this space. It's the place where East, I think, needs to meet West. As we look at the development of EMS around the world, there's a time where we've got to bring all this energy that's happening in the Middle East, all this energy that's happening in the East, and for East to meet West. So on that note, I say halas and maha salama, which is finished and goodbye. Thank you. And thanks to Bob Waddell for sending me to...
Our next presenter is Kevin McGuinness. How many of you know Kevin? Oh, maybe a third. I got to know Kevin back in 1995. He was Maine State EMS director and I was Minnesota's. And we developed a friendship right away that sort of followed us over the next couple of decades. And so Kevin spends a lot of time doing lots of different things for our industry. He runs the community paramedicine group at the National Association of State EMS Officials, and but he also spends a lot of time in the communications arena and is watching over not only the United States, but how we interface with other parts of the world. So Kevin, thank you for the work that you do and for leading us through this presentation.
Bet. What's next? Cool. Good afternoon. Gary asked me to do something that's a little US-centric, but to discuss how we have been moving CP ahead through the eyes of those that write legislation and regulations. I just start by saying I was a state EMS director for 10 years. I am now a recovering state EMS director, have been for quite a while. State EMS offices are interesting places. EMS in the United States was essentially born as a systems-driven entity as far back as the EMS Act of 1973, which formally stated that EMS will be developed, led, implemented as a system in a systems approach. And I truly believe the National Association of State EMS Officials has formally taken the stance that state EMS offices should be the lead agencies for their statewide EMS systems and should serve in a leadership, enabling, facilitating, encouraging, feeding role for those systems. Now, having said that, I realize that not all state EMS offices are the same. There are some that are very much limited in their outlook and in their roles. They're regulatory and they license, and that's about all that they do. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have very broad and active EMS systems led by very energetic EMS offices. And some examples are Maryland or Idaho, where they actually run parts of the systems, the communications systems in the state. And then in the middle is where you find most state EMS offices that truly are embracing that facilitating role. When I was state EMS director in Maine, our mantra was facilitate first, regulate second. But you know, as much as you want to lead your system and you want your system to be cutting edge and moving forward, and in Maine that's what we have tried to do, you also have that other responsibility of protecting the public. Because quite frankly, not all players in the, I know this is going to shock people, but not all players in the EMS system are motivated honorably. You know, they're not all in it for the patient necessarily. And even when they are, they're not always operating competently. And that's where a state EMS office also has to don that protective cape and do that. In the CP world, I think, you know, to sort of explain it well, when we started talking about CP in the latter part of the 90s here in the United States, some of my colleagues in EMS offices would say, oh my God, something else that we have to design a program and license. And others said, you know, that sounds like a pretty cool idea. Maybe we should do a statewide pilot project or a statewide pilot program so that, you know, we sort of guide it responsibly forward and make sure all the right pieces are put in place by anybody that wants to do it, but encourage them to do that. And I'm proud to say that Maine was one of those, but not the only one. California got around a major legislative issue that they had by creating a pilot program under a very innovative way, using another existing law in the state to do that. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any California CP programs. Michigan, South Carolina, all have done encouraging things towards creating pilots and encouraging people to go out and try this stuff. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about laws and regulations and how they're coming about, give you some idea of where we are in the United States right now, state by state, in terms of how well we're doing, how well we're embracing it, what are the kinds of activities that are going on are now. I would also say, provide some resources. The National Association of State EMS Officials has a formal community paramedicine and mobile integrated health committee, and we have a website on the NASEMSO website, which is www.nasemso.org. If you go to that and look along the top under committees, you'll see the Community Paramedicine Committee. You click on that. under resources and documents, you'll get to this page. And this is a pretty cool page. It's got 3 buttons, big buttons on it besides a bunch of documents that are available. The top button that you can click on will give you the latest published CPMIH articles. That comes from a group called the Ramsey Foundation that has been tracking those things, and they've been listed in the Arizona EMS office, and we just asked them for permission to put them on our website. The second button are latest EMS and CP news, the items happening in the news media. And so if you go on that this week, you'll see, I'll show you in a minute. The third button, the blue one, is a state-by-state community paramedicine status map. It gives you specific information. I'll tell you a bit more about all of these. So if you go on the news articles click, you'll get articles up to date this week, October 6th. Well, it's not this week, but last week. It was the most recent article, but you can go back years for articles on CPMIH. On the news page, a story out of October 13th out of Nevada, where an ambulance service, the ambulance service in Reno area is partnering with somebody to use drones for AED, sending AEDs to a scene ahead of the ambulance, which will be interesting because the FAA doesn't allow that at the moment, but good for them. The state CP status board and map, I'll go tell you a bit more about that. So all those things are up there, and we are very interested in promoting this concept. If you go to the state status board and click on a state like Maine, you'll get a thumbnail sketch of what's going on there by way of CP. And then if you click where it says click here for additional information, you'll get a state-by-state, for this, in this case Maine, listing of information of activity that's been going on in the state, the enabling legislation. There'll be links to that enabling legislation, regulations that have been written and links to those regulations, whether Medicaid support has been sought and what the history of that is, whether third-party payer support has been sought in the state, any activities along those lines, health systems supporting CP activities, that is what health systems are either embracing or providing CP or partnering to do so. Whether there's any state benchmarking performance measures related to CP in the state. What are the education and training requirements in the state for CP? Have there been any regional or statewide stakeholder meetings used en route to establishing community paramedicine? If so, what'd you learn? What should we avoid in the future if we haven't done that in our state yet? Do you require a community gap analysis or needs assessment to be done before a service can start? What kinds of resources do you have along those lines? Do you have a requirement for a CP medical director? What are you using for patient care records in your CP programs in your state? What EMS agencies are providing CP in your state? And finally, do you have any documents that have come out of your CP efforts that might be of interest to others? And who is the state contact for CP? So that's what you'll see up there. In development, we're also going to put up on this page, it's not there right now, but it will be a thumbnail sketch of state by state, all of the enabling legislation and rules that exist. So you can just simply go and look at what states have what. We do also on that page have a document, which is a resource on community health needs assessment, so that state EMS offices can provide that to people who want to go out and do a needs assessment in their areas before starting a CP program. Interestingly, one of the recommendations in this is don't do it yourself. You've got lots of hospitals, you probably have hospitals in your area who are required by the IRS to do a health needs assessment every 3 years. So go steal somebody else's. All right, the statutory approaches taken by states over the past dozen or so years have been varied. In some cases, states don't need special legislation to do CP. A delegated practice state like Texas is an example where there is no statewide scope of practice, but individual medical directors can set their own, essentially, scopes of practice, and all they need to do is write in community paramedicine, and set up the requirements for that, and as long as they're comfortable with that, you're in business. In some states, the law as it currently exists have definitions that work well as long as, and this is in 99% of the cases, as long as whatever you're doing by way of community paramedicine stays within the current scope of practice for emergency providers, for EMS providers. If you're there, you're golden. Some states, New York was one, Wyoming I'm going to talk about, had to further define in rules or regulations how it was they wanted the system to evolve and what people had to do to actually participate in the system and agencies to participate in the system and that sort of thing. Just some more definition. And then in some states, you definitely needed statutory changes in order to just simply have the practice of community paramedicine and or to get paid to do it. One of the big problems that we have is that we have met the enemy and he is us. And that is that back in 1973, when the EMS Act was passed, the idea of EMS was a very broad one, broadly defined. The idea was, wherever possible, we would prevent emergency illnesses and traumas from occurring. Prevention, primary prevention. If an emergency, if that was unsuccessful and an emergent illness or trauma happened, then we would move on to secondary prevention, which is lights and sirens, get to the scene and try and mitigate the problem, get the patient wherever and take care of the patient. And then after that episode was over, we would try and prevent that issue from happening to that patient again through rehabilitation. So we were very broad, we defined ourselves very broadly. And if we had the same definition of EMS in 2000s that we had in the 70s, we wouldn't have had need for law changes. However, the attorney generals in our states today say, no, EMS is emergency. You're doing non-emergency stuff, and you're not authorized, the state EMS office is not authorized to approve those. And so there have been laws that have addressed this in at least now a dozen states on that. Generally, they aim at and use as a definition community paramedicine as the focus. Minnesota, Maine are cases in point. And in some cases, they use mobile integrated healthcare, which by definition is an administrative arrangement among providers of community paramedicine and physician services and nursing services and dental services and whatever services you want to include as an offering to the public under integrated healthcare guise would be mobile integrated healthcare. And only 2 states have actually addressed that in their laws that I'm aware of. Colorado has one part of their program addressing an integrated healthcare approach. I don't believe that's been evolved or implemented yet. And it also has a community paramedicine portion. Massachusetts went entirely mobile integrated healthcare in terms of the title of their program. And that was very interesting because when you think about it, you're trying to write a law that involves a whole bunch of people, doctors, nurses, and others who are licensed by a variety of agencies in the state. That gets really, really messy in terms of inter-office bureaucracy. And to date, not because of that necessarily, but in Massachusetts, they proceeded slightly in one direction and one of their priorities, but everything is basically at a standstill as I understand it. In Wyoming didn't need to change its law. They broadly interpreted their law, which enables the office to operate a comprehensive EMS and trauma system. In our state, that didn't fly, but in Wyoming, that flew. And to simply to develop rules based on that. Now, when Andy Gienap, the state EMS director in Wyoming, set out to do this, he consulted very smartly with Gary Wingrove, maybe not so smartly with me, but the two of us kind of led him through this. And it was a real gas because it gave us an opportunity to create a comprehensive set of rules that define everything we think is good in community paramedicine. And that was put into law a year or so ago, or on the books a year or so ago. And generally what's contained are, they address the individuals who are going to practice, you address the agencies that are going to hire or have the individuals who are practicing, and you talk about education and some other things like record keeping. They did it as an endorsement for currently licensed basic and advanced life support folks, and the endorsement is for a community EMS technician or a community EMS clinician. What we would call the community EMS clinician today a community paramedic, a sort of, I think, as a general practice community paramedic. And then there are the rules that, for that endorsement. I'm not going to go into those in any detail. So the technician, the intention here is that a lot of folks want to do treat and release, want to do treat and alternative destination, want to do things that come out of their 911 call base, so that they don't take the patients to an inappropriate place like an ED for whatever care they get. In order to do that, we believe that that can be done by training a person for more along the lines of 80 hours than the 300 hours for a general practice community paramedic. And so in Wyoming, they set these up as 2 different training levels, which can be done by any basic to advanced life support provider as an endorsement. The educational programs have to be provided by a college or university, or there are some others, co-AMSP providers, and are very specific. The content for the general purpose community paramedic or community EMS clinician looks very much like the national consensus curriculum of 300 hours and has those portions broken out. And that is evolving right now. And the person evolving that is in the back of the room. And have we completed the 4th? Working on the 4th edition. There's some specifics about documentation and reporting. They encourage the technicians, because this is, as I said, a part of the 911 dispatch practice, to use their EPCR system. But the community EMS clinician, which is a broader practitioner, is encouraged to use a reporting system appropriate to their practice. Agencies specifically have to apply to for approval to do this, and there are some requirements for the agencies. And for the agency requirements are all very responsible. They got to tell the state where they're going to, who they're going to serve and where. Whatever conclusions of a gap analysis has been done, or health needs assessment's been done, what the healthcare goals and objectives are, what kind of performance measures they're going to use, what kind of protocols they're going to use, and who's the medical director providing oversight for the program. Notice it doesn't say we won't give you that approval if you have, a DO instead of an MD doing your program or whatever. It just says they want to know. They want to make sure that there's medical direction. And that's very common to all of the states doing statewide pilot projects as well. They very specifically here say that the scope of practice is limited to the current scopes for those licensed EMS providers, and they're just being crystal clear about it. So that's a pretty typical, that's a very comprehensive way of defining community paramedicine practice in a state. And if you don't have that, if it's really ambiguous in your state, it's something that you might want to have as protection. I haven't really seen that happen very broadly across the country. Where is CP enabled? That is, where is it not prohibited? Well, it is enabled in 48 states and territories, and a little clearer. Here's a map. The blue is where it is enabled, and the not blue, I don't know what that color is, rose or something, is where it is not enabled. Now, the way that we found out that it was enabled, the state EMS office told us they've interpreted their laws as enabling or not enabling CP or not prohibiting CP. Or when we didn't get answers to that, this is based on surveys that we've done from 2013 to the present, we have looked at the state and seen if there are any CP services there. And if there are, we assume that it's enabled. Maybe a bad assumption, but generally sound. So most states do enable CP. We know that there's no universal funding provisions under law for CP. Most of the startups are self-funded by the service based on using excess capacity of staffing that they maintain for emergency response or some other staffing arrangement. Or they've gone out and gotten grants to support the practice. The use of Medicaid programs for CP is expanding. Minnesota was the first, kind of brought the barrier down. We have a survey going right now, and that's where this information came from, on what states are now have Medicaid ability to pay for CP. Maine, Minnesota, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Utah, North Carolina, Wisconsin all have provisions of some sort, either in place or soon in place, for treatment and no transport, okay? And in some of those cases, it's only partial, like in Maine. If you have a cardiac arrest on the scene, you're not going to transport the patient, you can charge for it. If you have a diabetic patient and you treat and don't transport, you can charge for it. And there are a couple of states that are like that. Some have more broad capabilities. For community paramedicine services, Minnesota, Arizona, and Nevada so far are the only ones that have identified themselves as having fairly broad Medicaid funding. Health systems or ACOs that are often a source of contracting for specific services for CP. Certainly MedStar in Texas is an example, a really good example. They've been very successful at contracting with their hospitals and ACOs for specific CP or MIH type services. And then in many states now, third-party payers are getting to become part of the measure. Much interest. United Healthcare is very interested. Blue Cross Blue Shield's been very interested in a number of places. Michigan and Kentucky both indicated that they've have third-party payers reimbursing for CP. Yep. A very useful general provision that Matt Savasky provided us originally came in 2013 in the Medicare Handbook. One of the provisions for general provisions for preventive services was changed to read instead of preventive services means services provided by a physician to mean preventive services means services recommended by a physician. That opened up the waterfront for us because now that allowed a state Medicaid office to define community paramedic as an acceptable provider of these kinds of services, and if a doctor then recommended that these services be given, community paramedics could go out and do it and be paid. NASEMSO, National Association of State EMS Officials, did a CP survey in 2015, and we're about to redo it. We've been focusing on that CP status board for most of our work, but we're going to redo this survey as well, bring it up to date. We've discovered in that survey some surprises, at least surprises for me. I didn't think there was as much activity out there as there is. There is a lot of activity, and state EMS offices are anticipating a lot of activity and are very interested in pushing that activity. 45 out of 49 states, or 92%, of the state EMS officials said they have CP activity in their state. Now that might just be preliminary discussions, or it might be full-blown CP services. It's a mix. But to have that kind of recognition of CP kind of floored me. Is there activity, we asked, to try to use Medicaid to reimburse CP MIH services? We had about 45% of the services of the state said yes. They are doing something about this and are working on it. Third-party payers involved in the development of CPMIH reimbursement strategies, not so much, about 32% said yes, but still, that's a lot, because at the time we did this, we were really not aware of more than a handful of states that had any discussions with third parties about CP. Are hospitals and health systems involved in the development of CPMIH reimbursement strategies? A whopping 44% said yes, which is kind of more what I would expect, but that's way beyond the levels of participation that we would expect state EMS offices to be aware of in their states, that they have health systems or ACOs that are actively working to develop reimbursement strategies for CP. State EMS law changes to allow CP. At this point, in 2015, 7 states said that they had changed their laws, and I know that by now another at least 5 or 6 have gone that route. So that is definitely picking up speed. Do you have or soon expect to have regulations governing education practice or other elements specific to CPMIH? Well, not so much, but 10 states said that they definitely were going in that route, going down that line. I think that a lot of states really don't know how they want to do this because it's kind of difficult to try and regulate something like CP, which is done differently by definition, in every place that it's operated. So having a minimum set of regulations may be a little bit difficult. Do you expect to formally certify or license CPMIH personnel? 90% of the respondents said, yes, we're going to do that. And we're going to do, about half of them said agencies would be licensed to do that. A lot of interest for something that we thought a lot of state EMS offices weren't even paying attention to. Do you have regulations with a scope beyond your state's current EMS scope of practice definitions? 3 states said yes. So that pretty much is held that if it's within the current scope of practice for EMS providers, that is probably a safe practice that CP is going to pursue. Are agencies that provide CPMIH services required to have medical directors specifically for that activity? About half of the respondents said yes, and about half said no. So we're not quite sure what's going on behind those answers. They said, if yes, what is the relationship with the EMS medical director? Well, in about 40% of the cases, it's the same person. Okay. What we were trying to get at was, are you using a primary care doc to do CP, or are you using your EMS docs? But clearly there are states in which they have primary care docs coordinating with the EMS medical director. And one thing that's been pretty common to pilot projects that have been done on a statewide basis, I know in Maine, and I know this is true in some of the other pilot project states, one of the things we wanted to make sure didn't happen was if you have crappy medical direction for your EMS operation, we didn't want you getting into CP and having crappy medical direction for that. You don't need that. You need to fix your EMS act before you start doing other stuff. Is online medical direction commonly available to CPMIH providers? That kind of surprised me. Well over, I think, 25, 26 states said that yes, they do. Are standing orders commonly used for CPMIH? 47% said yes. Is there a requirement for community health needs assessment before commencing services? Only 30% of the states said yes. Are you going to have a CPMIH evaluation plan at the state level? That is, does it work in the state or doesn't it work in the state? Most of them said no. I was really surprised that we had near 40% that said yes, we're definitely going to be doing that. We're going to be evaluating whether these services work. And this is hard to read, but I'll tell you the gist of it. Do CPMIH provider agencies use the state EMS data collection system, EPCRs, for CPMIH patient record entry. And basically it was all over the map. And what it reflected was that in some cases they were trying to use a state run record, usually unsuccessfully because it didn't accommodate CP activities. Now we have the new image trend elite system that specifically is supposed to do that. But I know in my own service where we started CP, we created our own form, electronic form. And so every time our CPs went out and did a call, they would fill out the electronic form, would send that right to our medical director. It was a really cool form. And we took, instead of writing down all the meds, we took pictures of all the meds, all the bottles, and that went into the form. We took a picture of the patient, went into the form. We take a picture of the patient's house with their permission, went into the form. So the doctor at the other end, the medical director, could get a gist for what we were encountering when we saw the patients. So we do all that nice stuff, and we assume that it went into the medical director's record. We don't know that it ever got to the primary care physician, which is just a quirk of our system at the time. That's changed. But then we'd fill out the EPCR report for the state. And so we're double reporting at least there. And I think that's where most places are today, and clearly that's a problem. Last week we had the National Association of State EMS Officials annual meeting in Oklahoma City. And at our CPMIH committee, we said, what do we need to be working on this year? And the unanimous response of the 40 people that were in the room, state EMS directors, was data. We got to figure out this data thing. We got to figure out how it's going to interact with hospital systems. I thought the Dubai answer of something that clicks right with Epic or Cerner or some other, whatever the hospital system is, I know Minnesota has gone that route too, is probably the good answer. But it's got to click with physicians' offices, it's got to click with region-wide, city-wide, or statewide health information exchanges, and it's got to click with the state EMS run record system. So that's going to be a definite priority for the coming year. So that's all I have, and I will answer questions with the rest of the group. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get our afternoon presenters back up. And our break stuff will get delivered in about 7 minutes or so. So we'll do our question and answer time until it's ready for us. So let's see what questions you have.
Over the back corner there. First, second, third.
My question would be for, excuse me, anybody from the Australian programs. Just wondering how, with a bachelor's degree, how the paramedics fare versus nurses in pay in Australia.
Well, basically, the pay between nurses and paramedics is pretty much on par. There'll be people argue paramedics get paid more. There'll be some argue nurses get paid more. I think it just varies on your rosters and things like that, but it's comparable. One of the outcomes, I was talking to someone earlier, was that there's quite a demand for nurses to get into paramedicine, and there's a couple of graduate diploma bridging programs available specifically for that purpose, and there's also some programs that will give credits for nurses to get in. So we find that there's a flight from nursing to paramedicine, not the other way.
Can I just add to that, that in that profile as well, I think Dave Waters might shake his head if I get this figure wrong, but I understand that 85% of the current enrolment in paramedic degree courses is female. So it's vastly becoming a female-dominated industry.
85 or 65? That's the truth. Who's next?
Other questions? There was a question down here. You're third now. Sorry.
Can you give us a sense, Kevin, on with the overall trend in healthcare being to, this idea of value and bundling payments, the states that have added Medicaid reimbursement for community paramedicine, are they doing it on a fee-for-service where it's still a separate thing, or is it part of a bigger managed care or system kind of approach?
At this point, it's still the old fee-for-service across the board as far as I know. I think that as we get third-party payers involved, we're going to start seeing some changes, especially as we get more ACO-type contracts written. Then you're going to be providing a certain set of services across a certain population for a certain amount of fixed money.
In Minnesota, one of our largest programs is a Medicaid Shared Savings ACO that owns both a clinic system and an ambulance service.
Just here, Gary. Next. Did you want a question?
I wrote them down to save everybody time. So for the guy, what's the top speed of your car in Dubai allowed? Having driven in Dubai, I want to know.
Yeah, I know. Is the machine still recording?
Disregard that question. It'll be beer 30.
The latest has a top speed of 315, but we don't go that fast. But one of the issues of speed limits in Dubai and the accident rates is 120 kilometres an hour. What's that? 65 or something is the standard speed limit. A lot of fixed. It's monitored over there by radar, and it gives a 20-kilometre grace. So. You'd got to be doing 140 before you get a ticket. But having given that, let me quote this in the packet that was in last year's paper. Last year, of the licensed drivers in Dubai with a speed limit of 120 with 20 kilometres grace, there was 1.65% of the licensed drivers did not get a speeding fine last year.
Just stay up there. Are any of the native Saudis employed with your agency?
Sorry?
Are many native Saudis employed with your agency?
Not in Dubai. I don't think we've got any Saudis in Dubai. UAE have a very committed program to train UAE paramedics. There's been quite a program running there for about a decade, I suppose it's run. That program that we brought over 20 students to Australia were all local UAE trained. They want to establish a paramedic academy there, particularly to attract the UAE national. Having said that, the majority of our workforce in Dubai, you might have picked up from the photos, is basically Filipino or Indian from a nursing background. That's the source of the medical staff at this point in time.
So are the third country nationals allowed to be moved in tractor-trailer people movers, like I saw here? The tractor-trailer people movers that are moved after hours for construction?
There's a large labour workforce, as you know, in Dubai. So part of employment conditions of those is provision of transport and accommodation. So a big feature on the road is what's commonly known as the labour buses. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they're a major source of the road traffic trauma. However, having said that, the government has been very committed to improving that system, both in the safety standards of the vehicles, the training of drivers, and I've got to be honest and say the accident rates of those vehicles have dropped dramatically. In my first time there, and I was there for about a decade, 2008 to recently leaving there, there has been a significant decline in those major road trauma incidences.
Excellent, thank you. For Kevin, the last question, save everyone, is the chart that you showed was was it 2015? That the standard for the community paramedic being allowed in the map of West?
No, that was within the last year.
Oh, okay. West Virginia won the Special Innovation Project from CMS for community paramedicine. So that just happened last week, so you're good.
Okay, I'll change.
Okay, break is here. We're going to reconvene at 3:30.
every year.
We have 5 more minutes until our final session of this afternoon starts. So gather all your friends and family and bring them to the tables.
Hello. Oh, there we go. We're ready to get started again. All right, welcome back. Just a reminder, at 5:30, the reception just right next door here in FNG. So we'll hopefully see you all there. Reception translates into free food and beverages. So be sure to come over. And I'd like to introduce now Tristan Coomer and Sam Salmon. And they're going to talk about enhancing the reach of community paramedicine through educational pathways.
Howdy, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yes, yes. This requires some feedback, right? Well, like Gary said, my name is Tristan Coomer. I'm an advanced care paramedic and community paramedic clinician for the City of Wyoming Fire and EMS, which is a small suburb just outside Cincinnati. I'm also the Education and Development Officer for Mobile CE. Next to me here is Sam Salmon, a good friend of mine and colleague. He's the Director of Integrated Marketing and Communication for the Community Paramedics Association and Registry. I'm very excited to sit here today to talk to you about a partnership that you can be involved in. We offer an innovative partnership with community organizations, public administration, healthcare networks, and accredited educational institutions, all right, all in hopes that we can transform the paramedic career with expanded roles in our communities. We do this by integrating global networks of resources. We do this by opening untapped potential and lead the development of this paramedic profession. Community Partners is a unique membership program hosted by Paramedic Health Solutions, Mobile CE, and the Community Paramedic Association and Registry. And our mission is simple. We expect as a community partner program that you'll develop a safe and healthy community through collaborative planning, education, advocacy, and action. We hope to see you promote community health and development by connecting people, their ideas, and the resources that are there to you. We want to empower you to take leadership roles in educating your community. We also, as community partners, want to support your ability to foster an environment for professional development and innovation. And finally, we want to assist you in delivering outstanding services and support that are resident-focused and dedicated to the full participation of our communities. However, for us to accomplish that, we need to know what our community is and what our community is made up of. How many practicing community paramedics do we have in here? Who's heard of, okay, very good, awesome. How many of you have done a community paramedic health needs assessment? I see kind of the, sort of, and then there's the one, okay. So very good. So before we can decide what our gaps are in healthcare, how many of us have heard gaps in healthcare? Okay, probably all of us, right? We first and foremost, before we can even get to that, we need to understand our entire community. Sam's going to come up here and he's going to talk to you a little bit about a community that we're used to, that I'm used to dealing with on a regular basis, and that's the one that I work for. I also want to encourage you not only to use the resources by sitting behind a computer and finding all. I don't know how many of you are I got to find all the numbers, right? How many of this? How many of that? Let's split things down. How many men? How many women? How many have 1 tooth, 7 teeth? Things like that, right? But go out and actually sit down with some of these people. Your mayors, your city managers, your clergy, all right? Some of the community planners in your area, right? These are really important people who have a completely different perspective on things than even you do as the community paramedic coming into this. Business owners, extremely important, right? They're the ones that are, who knows Bob from the last 25 years because he's always coming got his donut and his hot coffee in the morning, right? So it's a partnership and a friendship. Fire, EMS, and police chiefs, we already do this, right, for the most part? How many of you don't fight with your fire departments? Or vice versa? For me, I got lucky because I'm with a fire EMS service, but you get out, I guess out here in West, a lot of places are separate. You go up north in Ohio from where we're at, everything is separate in the county and municipalities. And something very interesting to me that I found out, especially knowing Sam, is talk to your historical societies. I don't know about you, but that'd be the last place that'd even pop into my brain as a medical professional or even a clinician. But these historical societies are the ones who have followed the history of this group through many, many, many years. And sometimes finding out little things that they know will open up a completely broad and new thought process for you as a community paramedic.
Okay, so the example that we're going to use today is this. Let me adjust this a little bit. I'm a little taller than I think the last person up here. The one that we're going to use is the city of Wyoming, and that's in Ohio. It's outside of Cincinnati, and it's a suburb. It is almost directly located in the center of Hamilton County. And a little background on the evolution of Hamilton County. It's the southwestmost county in the state of Ohio. Ohio was founded in 1803, and this area was the first developed area largely in Ohio. Wyoming, though, was a little bit late of a bloomer in the whole city game here, whereas the city of Cincinnati became an actual city in 1819. The city of Wyoming became a village in 1874 and then did not become a city all the way until 1949. So it was a little of a late bloomer in this game. Wyoming is consisted of about 8,400 total residents, and it's about a 50-50 split male to female ratio. In regards to the age of the population, the majority of those that live in Wyoming do so for the schools. They're there for their children's school years, and then once the children have graduated, they'll sell their homes and move out of Wyoming. One of the good things to know about Wyoming is they do have one of the top-rated school districts in the state of Ohio. And education is something that is extremely important to the Wyoming residents. They understand the importance of higher learning, and about 85% of the residents in Wyoming have a higher than a high school diploma education. Employment is a solid thing in Wyoming. Those in the community find jobs with such prominent companies, and some of these you guys will have heard of. The big ones are Procter & Gamble. They're located just, they have many offices throughout Cincinnati. The next one, which is actually, the campus is almost as large as the city of Wyoming, is GE Aviation. A lot of the planes that you guys flew in on to Vegas, they make their parts there. And then there are multiple community hospital systems that the residents of Wyoming work for, which would be Mercy Health, Tri-Health, Cincinnati Children's, and UC Health. Although they only seem like one hospital, each one of them do have multiple campuses around the Cincinnati area. The community, though, is not as diverse as you would think. About 89% of the population, the residents of Wyoming, are comprised of those with Caucasian and African American descent. Understanding our community makes responding and anticipating the needs a much easier process. Patients' needs in our communities include a need for substance abuse education, as well as to understand the gaps needed to be filled in regards to access to food, healthcare, and medication management.
The Community Partner Program is founded on an innovative culture, okay? And what do I mean by innovative culture? Well, we encourage new and advanced methods of creative thinking. And we want this to be our daily activity, right? We want that to become our culture. We can do this by sharing our goals. We can do this by trial and error, being open to it, knowing that we can celebrate our success, we can learn from our failures, right? And we want to create this ability to be creative and welcome growth, okay? How many of you are in the fire service as well as EMS? Okay, so we got some guys back here. They'll be able to tell you that in the fire service we have this little saying called, 100 years of culture never impeded by progress, right? So nothing's changed, right? And we're getting much better about that. But we need to continue to do this even in the EMS field. We don't want to be that Hershey's chocolate bar that hasn't changed since the 1900s, right? We want something new. We want something to be a little bit better. We offer a unique collaboration. We can facilitate this innovative culture. We can eliminate unnecessary processes, all right? And we can allow this collaborative discussion. And we need to disseminate those values community-wide. Some of the things that as a Community Partners program we offer. What's really nice about this is we have all the things that we've heard about, right? American Heart Association. We got Heart Saver programs, BLS programs, neonatal, pediatric, teen awareness, young adult education, older adult education. How many of you need that? How many of you think that would be important? Nobody? Not at all, right? We only got one. All right. We have a program in Wyoming called Check Up with a Medic. And I'll talk about a little bit about that. We have community paramedicine programs out there in the state of Ohio. It's something very new for us. All right, EMS education, interfacility transport, along with critical care and intensive care transport education. One of the community partner programs that I work with, or actually I started as the CPR coordinator, and this kind of blossomed with my background with Mobile CE. And we created this program, and it started with Wyoming Wellness, right? This was, all we're going to do is we're going to open up separate times, 2 days a week. We're going to have anybody in the community come down and get your blood pressure. How many people do you think in a year we saw? Why? Who wants to come to the fire department? Right? Who wants to come to the fire department just for that? Right? So finally we realized, okay, we know we have a need. We've done our community health needs assessment, right? We know what our gaps are. Well, now we need to get out in that community. We need to let them know that we're here. Half of the battle was they didn't know what we offered. So little things like getting your blood pressure checked, getting your vitals, right? 12 lead EKGs. We always have to remind them about the 12 lead EKGs. We don't put that one out there on paperwork because we had a lady decide that she was going to wait 2 hours with chest pain just so she could come in during those hours, right? We didn't want that, so we had to create a little bit of a change there. But we go out to, we open up an opportunity for football games, athletical physical days. We actually partnered with the school and the local physicians groups where 2 days a year, at the beginning of each year, all the students that need physicals for any of the sports that happen all come in at one time. And they go through this big line. It reminds me of the military, right, where everybody goes through in a little line. You get your blood pressure checked, you get all your vitals, you talk with different people, you get a little health assessment, you see the physician, and then guess what? Your physical's done and you're out the door. So in about 20 minutes, they're able to get your physical and taken care of, and it's somewhere familiar to you, and it doesn't cost anything. Anybody? She gave me the eyes. Didn't cost anything. All right, we continued to the point where now we're working with community organizations. We have a group of 65 and older. Every single month they have this dinner. Where do we go? We sit right outside. Anybody that wants that blood pressure take, you'd think those old ladies were so happy to see us, the fire department coming to see them, right? And then we have the department, the city department. So we have, just like most cities, we go see our maintenance department on a regular basis. About once a week we go in. Of course, we see the water park and the park department because they happen to be in the same area. But what we do is we go around and we give them these evaluations if they want them. If they don't, they don't. And what that's done is not only has it created this ability for us to get to know who we work with on a regular basis, but it also has created this enormous amount of trust between everybody. We've communicated. We know each other's faces. We can wave each other in the community. And guess what? Now we have these individuals coming to us and saying, hey, I've got these problems. Can you give me a hand? Can you let me know what you'd like me to do? And then we can help step them through those processes, especially if individuals who, I love it when they come up to you, because I haven't seen a doctor in 15 years. None of you ever had that, right? No? All right, you all know what I'm talking about. So those individuals, we have them right inside of our own community, right inside of our own businesses, and so on. So it's important that these are the individuals that are in our community. Welcome Home program was another one. This is where our paramedics will go out to a home and they'll discuss with a patient once they've returned from, usually from a stay at a hospital. They go over their discharge paperwork and things of that nature and give them the information that they need. And then another new one that we just started was the newborn program. And in this particular instance, we follow individuals who are brand new moms. It's easy, isn't it? I wouldn't know, I don't have any kids, but they tell me it's pretty rough, right? So what we do is we offer an opportunity. Our city brings donations in of different things of that nature to make a safe home. And so what we do is we're able to go out to these homes and we're able to discuss with these individuals about their newborns, ask some questions, because some of our individuals don't have access to the education in some instances. We have one of the best children's hospitals, and I guess I'm biased because I'm in Cincinnati, right? But Cincinnati Children's Hospital is ranked one of the number one one of the number one emergency ICU, neonatal, and cancer hospitals in the States. And part of that is their neonate program. In their neonate program, they do a really nice job of educating individuals, especially when they come out of the hospital. But we have individuals in our community that, because of this program, have come to us and said, hey, I just want to let you know that we're bringing our daughter home in a few days. She's had a complete heart transplant. So then in the event that you come out here, we want you to know that she exists. And this is some of the things you can think about. How many of you see LVADs at all? Okay. Artificial hearts at all? A little bit. How many of you seen pediatric or infant LVADs, external LVADs? Anybody? A little bit. We have a couple in our community. And of course, they have to live within a specific amount of space from that hospital. So we do end up with these types of situations. So it's nice to be able to know who's in our community. I don't know about you, but if I've never seen an LVAD before, showed up and I have an infant, so not only do you have a pediatric patient, but now you have an LVAD that you don't know what you're talking about, right? So it's most certainly interesting. Another one of the big programs we have is a CPR and AED program. I'm sure most of you have heard of an AED, right? Man, y'all are sleeping. It's supposed to be a joke, right? CPR and AED, we deal with it all the time. All of us probably in this room, we can discuss this over and over until we're blue in the face. It works, right? If it's done quick enough and we can get to these individuals, and part of that's our community. We need buy-in, right? Hands-on CPR, it'll work, right? We also have this ability to consult with groups. We consult currently as a community partners program with adult and pediatric drug task force. How many of you have heard of the opioid epidemic in Dayton, Cincinnati, and northern Kentucky? Nobody? Just a couple? Well, if you're not familiar with it, Dayton was in Cincinnati area. That portion of northern Kentucky and whatnot is considered ground zero for the opioid epidemic in the United States. We see more opioid overdoses daily than most people see in years, all right? There was a point in time where we had 3 days separate of a Friday, Saturday, Sunday where we had over 30 deaths within a specific 12 to 24-hour period, okay, because it could not get to people fast enough, and because it was, unfortunately, as bad as it is. I'm sure we could go into a lot of depth about that particular conversation, but we're not going to get into that right now, okay? But just know that as a community, you may deal with these things, right? Same thing, we collaborate with our physicians' offices. Like I said earlier, we had this athletic physical days. We do all the CPR AED classes for all of our physicians groups, so we're very comfortable with our physicians in that area. A lot of times they'll be like, well, I'm Dr. So-and-so's patient. We're like, we know exactly what he'd say to you if you didn't let him know that we came to see you, right? Same thing with our county and public health organizations, and again, the historical societies. We currently have, what do we say? We had 8,400 people in the city of Wyoming. That's about 3.5 square miles. We have 16 AED, public AED locations, okay? So if you snap that and bust that into, that's one for every 500 people, okay? For a lot of places, that's a lot of AEDs. I don't know about you. So that's not counting our churches. This is just the ones that we take care of. Now, mind you, we've done a really nice job educating over the years, so just about every school has them. A lot of these nursing facilities have them, and so on. Public outreach is another really important side of this, and one of the things that we did is we created a video up here. This is our community CPR video that I just wanted to share with you that we have the ability to support and use.
Every year, more than responsive. Saving a life may be necessary and shockingly simple. We hope you will join us in this life-saving mission.
So in our process here, we decided we needed to let more people know what was going on, and we needed to do more than just a flyer. So one of the very exciting things about Wyoming, and particularly in depending on your cities, you may have the same ability, is we list serve. So when you move into the community, our actual city manager will actually bring a little basket of little fun little things right to you about the community and whatnot, phone numbers and so on, and they come to your home, and they give it to you, and they discuss a little bit about the community, right? We're small, so we have that ability. But one of the things is we also, through that listserv, we're able to mail this out to people, and this got a lot of attention. As soon as this started going out, it was a little bit more than just a CPR flyer, right? I don't know about you, but some CPR flyers look better than others, and some are more expensive than others. We charge about $25 for a CPR class in the city, okay? This has continued to where we're now offering our BLS providers at a $25 rate and our ACLS and PALS providers systems through Mobile CE at a $75 per rate. So in regards to actually doing your full ACLS, PALS, and so on and so forth, we have that ability. This is another one. Through this same exact program, we decided, Leland Fire Department, who's heard of it down in North Carolina? Anybody? Down firefighter CPR. Anybody? Oh, this is great. So down firefighter CPR was actually Leland Fire Department's baby. They came up with this. And what it is it's a way to teach individuals how to, on a fire ground, provide CPR to an individual, get them out of their turnout gear as quickly as possible, right? So this is how they did it. And so what we ended up doing is we augmented this particular program to fit our needs, and then this was blasted out to the community. On September 20th, we were able to bring in about 50 firefighters from local areas that had never done this before to teach them how to do this. Not gonna lie, some of that stuff at the end was made up. All right. So what we've done with as a community partner, being with Wyoming, is if you notice, we've started to feel out some of these gaps that we had. We were able to educate and get involved and be able to offer an opportunity to these individuals. So at this point, you're probably wondering, well, how do I become a partner? Maybe, I don't know. We're gonna find out. So my first question for you is, are you an advocate for your department, organization, or community? All right, that's the biggest thing, and that's advocacy. That's extremely important. Would you consider implementing a community paramedicine education program? Something very different than approach compared to what we're normally used to. Is program accreditation important to you? If it is, we can help with that. And would your community and organization benefit from access to education? We can do that. And do you value clinical expertise, patient values, and evidence-based research for delivering the best patient care? A lot of us are probably in that same boat. Implementing is very different, right? What's my return? Well, global consulting, global resources, global connections. We've got partners in UK, in Australia, Canada, the US, all right? We provide high-quality education in a way different than most. And what's even more exciting is this a la carte, or your ability to be completely built upon what your needs are, what your community needs are. and how we can support that process. A lot of you, when you go back and you look at the community paramedic curriculum, or should I say a curriculum, a number of different curriculums out there. I know that Pete talked about one there in Australia. Just a reminder to you that if we kind of remember our BLS providers, primary care, so on and so forth, just wanted to give you a real quick reminder. This is the same slide that Gary showed at the beginning of the day today in regards to the universal way we discuss these caregivers. How many of us are used to this? EMT to paramedic. That's the education pathway, right? That's it. Well, you might be able to do, I believe that most places call them intermediate or advanced. You have that middle ground. And then maybe you go critical care or tactical care, whatever the case may be. What if I told you there was a different way? Not only could we integrate our primary care paramedic and our advanced care paramedic, but then there now is a clinical ladder for these individuals, all the way through a certificate program. Primary care, your EMT level, right? Your primary